From calling Tito Ortiz the dumbest living thing, to clashing with Nate Diaz over money, here are the top fighters who Dana White hates. And if you think hate is a strong word, let me remind you of Dana's infamous rivalry with Tito Ortiz. This guy had a long and tumultuous history with Dana White. Their feud dates back a lot of years, and it's one of the most well-known in the history of the UFC. White has been highly critical of Ortiz's behavior both inside and outside the octagon, while Ortiz has accused White of mistreating him. And I see it. In a 2018 interview on the Barstool Sports podcast, White openly criticized Ortiz by labeling him as De La Hoya weird and accusing him of being a liar. Uncle Dana also expressed his strong belief that Ortiz lacked intelligence, describing him as one of the dumbest beings on the planet. Yikes! Despite their animosity, however, Ortiz remains a legendary figure in the sport, having had a long and successful career as a fighter. And even though he and White may never see eye to eye, there's no denying that there is a mutual respect there. The same cannot be said about White's relationship with Randy Couture, though. Couture is a UFC Hall of Famer who had a major falling out with Dana White. The dispute began when Couture became vocal about fighter pay, as he advocated for better compensation for the athletes who put their bodies on the line in the octagon. White didn't take kindly to Couture's criticisms, and the two found themselves at odds. Couture ultimately resigned from his position with the UFC and signed with a rival promotion, leaving his relationship with White permanently strained. White has gone on live interviews and podcasts to talk about Couture leaving a few times, and it seems like he's glad to have him gone. But Couture has fired back too. In fact, he believes that White's feud with him translated even further into business territory. Couture believed that his son's UFC career was cut short because of White's personal beef with him. I don't know how much of that is true, but it's safe to say that their relationship is somewhat permanently strained. Despite the feud and his exit, Couture remains one of the most respected fighters in the history of the sport, more importantly the UFC. And there's nothing White can say or do to change that. But if you think Dana's hate list is limited to men, you would be wrong. Remember how heated things got between him and Chris Cyborg? The whole drama stemmed from Cyborg's contract negotiations with the UFC, with the fighter seeking better pay and more favorable terms. Now, we all know that contract negotiations make things a bit messy, especially when Dana White is involved. And that's exactly what happened. White was highly critical of Cyborg during the whole process, calling her a nightmare to deal with and accusing her of turning down fights. The two went back and forth in the media, with Cyborg ultimately leaving the UFC and signing with another promotion. And in the end, it seems like things worked out for the best. For Cyborg at least. After she moved on from UFC, she went on to achieve great things. In fact, she is the only fighter in history, male or female, to become a Grand Slam champion, which basically means that she's held world championships across 4 major mixed martial arts promotions. And that says a lot. Her ferocious striking and relentless style have earned her legions of fans around the world, and she's widely regarded as one of the greatest fighters of her generation. And while her relationship with White may be strained, Cyborg's legacy in the sport is secure, and she will always be a huge part of the UFC's history. But Dana's rivalry with Chris still pales in comparison to his feud with Brendan Schaub. Brendan is a former UFC fighter who's since been a well-known podcast host and commentator, and in recent years he has been highly critical of Dana White and the UFC, often taking aim at the promotion's business practices and treatment of fighters. And obviously, the UFC Supremo has not taken kindly to Schaub's criticisms. White has been highly critical of Schaub's fighting abilities, calling him a fucking idiot and a moron on multiple occasions. Schaub didn't hold back either, and has stated that White needed a reality check and was surrounded by yes men. He also criticized White's lack of originality and compared him to a low-budget Vince McMahon. Schaub further alleged that White and McMahon share a penchant for using steroids and dressing inappropriately. Yikes! But I guess that's just how these public feuds are, full of drama. Speaking of drama though, what about White's feud with Ben Askren? Ben is a former UFC fighter who made a big impression during his brief stint with the promotion. He was known for his outspoken personality and his willingness to speak his mind, even if it meant taking shots at the UFC and its president Dana White. Can't say he didn't ask for it. The UFC Supremo didn't take kindly to Askren's criticisms, and the two engaged in a public feud. He even called Askren the most boring fighter in MMA history, whereas Askren returned with the same energy and accused White of not giving him the respect he deserved as a fighter. It is really a rivalry for the history books, but I'm sure White's love-hate relationship with Nate Diaz will be remembered the most. Diaz is a notoriously known fighter who has had a long and often tumultuous relationship with Dana White. Nate's career in the UFC has been marked by a series of highs and lows, with his willingness to speak his mind often getting him in trouble with the promotion's brass. Despite the tension between Diaz and White, the fighter has always been a popular figure with fans, and that is thanks in part to his impressive fighting skills and his willingness to take on tough opponents. Now, the thing is, Diaz's ability to draw a crowd has made him a valuable asset to the UFC, so even if Dana doesn't particularly like him, he will always need him. Over the years, Nate and White have clashed on a number of issues, from fighter pay to promotional obligations. Following his victory over Tony Ferguson in the main event of UFC 279 in September 2022, Diaz completed his contract with the UFC, ending a 15-year tenure with the promotion. Now, there has been much speculation surrounding Diaz's future plans as a free agent, but nothing is confirmed yet. Did his relationship with the company's president have anything to do with that? Probably. And if Uncle Dana doesn't watch his mouth, this next guy could end up leaving as well. Jon Jones. He is widely considered one of the best fighters ever to grace the octagon, but his relationship with Dana White has been anything but smooth. The two have had a number of public disputes, most notably over contract negotiations. White has been critical of Jones for his behavior outside of the cage, including a high-profile hit-and-run incident. Jones has also been vocal in his criticism of White, at one point claiming that the UFC president was lying to the media about their negotiations. That's huge. However, it remains to be seen whether the relationship between Jones and White will ever fully heal. But that hasn't stopped White from giving credit where credit is due. He recently called Jones one of the greatest fighters ever. So let's just say it's complicated. Anyway, that was all for the top fighters Dana White hates. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.